Thank you, everyone. I'll grab your attention for a few minutes now. I hope you've enjoyed your lunch and had a chance to connect with everyone on your tables and around the room. Thank you. So, members and guests, our keynote speaker today is Geraldine Slattery, President Australia for BHP. Our format today will include a short address from Geraldine here at the lectern, followed by a conversation on stage with Christy Batten. Christy is an award-winning journalist with nearly 17 years of experience writing about mining. She's an Australian correspondent for Canada's mining.com and a regular contributor to Stockhead and Resources Rising Stars in Australia, and she's also a member of our Mining Club Steering Committee. So thank you. For now, I'd like to invite Andrew Hall, CEO of AMC, to introduce Geraldine. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Sally, and good afternoon, members and guests. Geraldine Slattery is the President Australia for BHP. She leads BHP's Australian business comprising iron ore, copper, nickel and metallurgical and energy coal, with operations in Western Australia, South Australia, Queensland and New South Wales. Her pathway to leading Australia's biggest business began in Ireland, where Geraldine grew up in the remote county Kerry. Her mother was a big believer in education, and Geraldine was encouraged to go to university and study physics. She began her career with an Irish engineering and construction company, focusing on a large petrochemical project in Belgium. On a working holiday in Australia, Geraldine joined BHP in the mid-1990s, working on the liquids to gas plant in Victoria. Geraldine says this cemented her appreciation of the complexity and importance of the industry as a source of progress for the industrialised world. In her 30 years with BHP, Geraldine has progressively taken on more complex technical, commercial and leadership roles, and has established a reputation for safety and performance and for creating growth-orientated teams. Prior to her current role, Geraldine was President of BHP Petroleum, headquartered in the USA, with assets across the Americas, the Caribbean, Australia and North Africa, where she gained extensive experience in working with partners, communities and governments in diverse jurisdictions across 4 continents. Geraldine is passionate about setting up the resources sector in Australia to be competitive globally through commodity cycles by investing in technology, productivity and people. This is her 3rd stint living in Australia, and I understand Geraldine is an AFL fan. She's spent time with the leaders, players and coaches of AFLW, and last weekend watched North Melbourne top off an amazing undefeated season by winning the grand final. Please join me in welcoming Geraldine Slattery to the Melbourne Mining Club.
Thank you for those very kind words of introduction. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'd like to start by echoing Sally's respects to the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet here today, and indeed to the traditional owners of the many lands on which BHP operates. I'd also like to acknowledge His Excellency Vitaliano Gallardo, Ambassador of Peru to Australia, and also to the Consul General of Chile, Mrs. Nazel Bernal, and indeed all distinguished guests. I'd also like to acknowledge the Melbourne Mining Club Chair, Sally Cox, co-patrons Lee Clifford and Hugh Morgan, and indeed the full committee. I congratulate you on another terrific year. Also, a special shout out to Gavin Colleray for your very admirable and incredible contribution, as we just heard, over the past 23 years. And of course, a big thank you here to everyone for supporting the Melbourne Mining Club. I'm incredibly proud to be a part of this great industry. And as you heard there in the remarks, I'm also a big fan of the AFLW since I came back to Australia. And so I was thrilled just last week to attend the annual W Awards and joined Tia Toth and Zoe Wakefer. Now, in case you're not an AFLW fan, Tia is a former player for the Fremantle Dockers, and Zoe is a current player for the West Coast Eagles. And both are part of Team BHP here in Australia. Now, after the event, I thought what the resources sector could learn from AFLW. Since launching in 2017, the competition has grown from 8 to 18 teams and tripled the number of games played in a single season. And even with all that, the AFLW, still hungry, still wants to keep growing. I thought about this, that hunger to grow, that focus on partnerships, and the approach to collective enterprise. It's these same ingredients that have enabled our resources sector to succeed for generations. Over many decades, we have enjoyed a competitive advantage based on Australia's natural resources, our deep mining experience, and our ability to develop at scale. Through multiple economic cycles, we have proven the enduring value of our industry. We've shown resilience as the external environment shifts. We've demonstrated how indispensable we are to Australia's prosperity. Consider this. As a sector, we've paid over $350 billion in company tax and royalties over the past 10 years. That's essentially the same as paying for 10 years of Medicare. So where to from here? Today, we find ourselves in the energy transition, one of the great industrial shifts in history. All of us here know that that shift will not occur without the minerals that Australia provides. Amid this global realignment, Australia must avoid the trap of taking our history for granted. We recognize that the playing field has shifted. Yes, the opportunity is great and we see it, but the stakes are even greater. And so today, I want to talk about the opportunity for our sector and for Australia to embrace a more competitive mindset. One that relentlessly pursues a better future and a mindset that holds every policy debate, every reform proposal up to the light and considers, does this make Australia more competitive? Because we all know that Australia does not have the same natural advantages as we do with our iron ore and coal when we look forward. And our challenges go beyond the nature of our resources. So to offer a perhaps blunt assessment, our access to skills and talent is under threat. Our investments in technology and innovation trails some of our biggest competitors. And we're not keeping pace as an attractive place to invest. Now, while this is not likely news to any of you here, there is an element of acknowledging this shift and responding. And we must be championing of enabling more competitive settings. We can't change the rocks we have, but we can certainly change and influence the enablers and the settings that govern their discovery, their extraction, and their development. If the sector, government, and investors work together, the opportunity is immense for the sector and for Australia, and I have complete confidence that we can compete and we can succeed. So, how do you do this in practical terms? Let me offer a couple of thoughts. One, by focusing on building the workforce with the right skills. Two, by embracing technology that will shape the future. And three, by championing a policy of competitiveness. Let's start with the skills, building the skills of our people. The demographics of the Australian mining industry are rapidly changing. The sector is facing structural challenges in skilled labour sufficiency. On the supply side, the threat is equal. Nearly 50% of the skilled engineering workforce will retire in the next decade. And we know that we don't have enough graduates coming into the mining-related fields to replace those that are retiring. Now, this is not a question of reward. Australian mining not only provides the highest paid jobs of all sectors domestically, but Australian mining jobs are actually higher paid than the equivalent roles in Canada and in the US. Part of the solution lies in expanding Australia's workforce participation. And this highlights the fundamental importance of the entire industry's work to build a more diverse and a more inclusive workforce. As you likely know, BHP has progressively increased gender diversity, and women now make up over 37% of our employee base globally. That's a figure that's more than doubled since we set our gender balance aspiration back in 2016. Now, this has not happened by chance. It's taken investment in education and in training pathways. It's taken policies to level the playing field in equity and in caring responsibilities. And it's taken working with regional communities to solve childcare availability. And also a continued conviction in making our culture more inclusive. Now, we all have a role to play here, and the government's efforts to expand fee-free TAFE places are commendable. I'm also heartened by the table of students who the Melbourne Mining Club are hosting here today. I look forward to meeting you. I'm certain that you are the future leaders of our industry. Now, for our part in 2020, BHP launched the Future Fit Academies in Perth and Mackay. And to date, more than 1,300 people have benefited from this initiative, with guaranteed jobs on completion of bespoke training. This is Australia's next wave of mining technicians and tradespeople. Most of them are new to industry, female or Indigenous. So continuing to bring these new talent sources into our workforce must be treated as part of the national competitiveness agenda and policy. Now, to turn to technology. The race is on to find and develop mineral resources around the globe. In this context, the federal government's commitment of over $500 million through Geoscience Australia to survey Australia's critical minerals is timely and indeed welcome. There is, I believe, a shared recognition that in mining, next-generation technologies will make our exploration, our development, and our operations safer, more sustainable, and more productive. And on that, I do know many partners in this room who are doing just that, including in renewable energy, in electric smelter furnace steel making, in research, and in decarbonisation. But when we stand back and look at how well is Australia positioned overall, Australia currently ranks 23rd in the Global Innovation Index, trailing Canada, the US, China, and much of the EU. Australia is ranked 20th in the world in our readiness to adopt and explore digital technologies. And while research and development investment as a share of GDP is growing rapidly across the OECD, in Australia, it's actually slowing down. I'm hopeful that the government's research and development review announced this week and led by Robin Denholm will find ways to reinvigorate our R&D progress. As we know, the artificial intelligence boom is a mining boom too. And if we needed any clearer reminder of the potential of AI, in the last year alone, Microsoft and NVIDIA joined Apple in the $3 trillion club. So as markets and societies begin to grasp the power and potential for artificial intelligence and how it will shape all of our futures. Our industry can, is, and should provide leadership in technology, and artificial intelligence will improve, undoubtedly, Australia's competitiveness. Finally, on policy, we must champion a more competitive Australia through our policy settings in the way we grant permits, regulate mining, and manage risk. It starts with streamlining permits, making it easier to develop major projects and bring them to market. Here in Australia, we're incredibly proud of the high standards that the industry upholds. But we need to be smarter, and we need to do it more efficiently. Time to market matters. In 2020, the Samuel Review found that on average, complex resource sector projects take on average over 1,000 days to assess and to approve. Of course, inefficient regulation just translates into project delays and uncertainty. Now, governments are figuring this out globally. The US introduced an Energy Permitting Reform Act this year, and the incoming Trump administration is continuing the conversation and the focus on permitting. Canada has created a federal permitting coordinator and amended its Impact Assessment Act to accelerate decisions. In Chile, the need for a better permitting system is now recognized across the Congress, and the government has made it a focus of its legislative agenda. For Australia, the principles should be clear. Put in place a risk-based permitting system that ensures processing timelines are certain and the outcomes are reliable. In short, we must modernize our permitting system in line with the changing nature of competition. Now, today I've focused on permitting, but of course I want to reiterate that tax settings are equally as relevant, as are labour laws. It remains our view that the industrial relations changes of the past 2 years will raise costs, reduce productivity, and take us backwards in our ability to compete globally. Well, this is my first time at the Melbourne Mining Club. It's also the last day of the year, or the last meeting, rather, of the year. A few weeks to go yet. So, to conclude, I want to first acknowledge and thank everyone here for another year of bringing new skills, new thinking, and technology to our industry, and making it a better place for our people, but also for the communities where we operate. I'm incredibly proud to be a part of this industry. All of us in this room have seen firsthand the difference that it makes. We're doing great things, but I believe, and I hope you will join me, in continuing to advocate for the sector to move faster, work harder to improve our competitiveness. I hope that 2025 brings us all out as advocates and continue to advocate and push for Australia's competitiveness globally. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you again, Geraldine, for being here today.
From listening to your speech, it's clear that you're very passionate about the mining industry. What would you say to those, sections of the community that don't understand mining's contribution?
Thanks, Christy. And what a relevant question. Look, I think we all get it in this room, but I think it's fair to say that if you're not close to the sector, if you don't see firsthand what it takes to bring the sector to life and the decisions, the capital, and the vision over 50 years, then or more, then it can be difficult to see that. And particularly in a world where news cycles kind of run in maybe social media type timings. I think here in Australia, it's an incredibly important point to raise because not only is it integral to our way of life, it's also integral to our economy and to our livelihoods. We know that 30% of our exports come from the resources sectors. The top 20 corporate taxpayers in Australia is in the resources sector. So what underpins our healthcare, our education system, our way of living comes from the resources sector. So I think it's incumbent on many of us here, but more broadly, to speak to the richness we have and what it takes to see that continue. So a very live conversation.
Obviously, we've talked about mining's importance to Australia. The re-election of Donald Trump in the US, do you think that's going to change anything for the industry here?
So early days, of course, and if we step back from the recent election, maybe just for a moment, I think we've seen the US on a bipartisan level recognizing the significance of mineral development. And that's come to life through a focus on de-risking permitting and simplifying permitting, and also focused on increasing supply chain resilience. I think we'll see that continue. The remarks from the narrative so far from the incoming administration certainly reinforces that. So I think we can expect to see that. I think even though it is early days, I think the narrative also suggests a stronger focus on US domestic economy and US domestic supply chain resilience and development of critical minerals. How that will play out in terms of the sector more broadly, I think remains to be seen. For us here in Australia in the mining sector, our best defense really is to recognize the significance and the value of what we have the lowest cost, highest quality product, and be ready to compete and take on the opportunities or indeed the threats that might play out.
Obviously, we can't talk about mining or even BHP without talking about China. There's been some interesting data out of China this year, but the iron ore price is largely held up. How do you see the outlook for China in 2025?
So I think we'll see 2024 close out with China reaching its own target of 5%. I think as we look into 2025, the same enduring themes that underpin its economy will continue to play out. We've seen housing be a drag, particularly on steel and iron ore. The most recent stimulus seemed to have garnered a bit more optimistic sentiment in the market, and we're starting to see some green shoots. So possibly the housing sector has bottomed out in terms of its lag. But beyond steel and iron ore, of course, the sectors that have call to whether it's copper or other minerals in electric vehicles and infrastructure and manufacturing, that's been a source of endurance and strength. Back to your question on iron ore, I mean, in terms of the outlook, I think we've anticipated and spoke publicly for some time that as China in particular reaches its kind of later stage urbanization, that we expect to see steel demand coming off, and indeed as scrap availability comes up. But there's still 1 billion tons of steel demand a year, so whilst we expect that to moderate, it's still strong.
And obviously the iron ore division is the powerhouse of BHP as a whole. I live in Perth, so I know how important it is. Every second person works or is connected to it somehow. What's the outlook for that division, and is there any sort of plans to keep growing?
Sure. So we expect prices to moderate between now and the end of the decade as new supply in fact comes into the market, as well as the declining demand for steel for many reasons. That recognition of a changing market has been core to the iron ore division in Western Australia, and thanks for your kind remarks about it. The team Wayo will love that. So Western Australia Iron Ore is the lowest cost and most efficient iron ore miner globally, and has held that position now for a couple of years. So, outstanding performance from the team there. That provides us with the resilience through a changing market, and we really see the benefit of that in margins. In terms of growth, so we're growing modestly to, we're 287 last year, kind of trending to 305 in 28 in terms of medium-term guidance. Growth beyond that is certainly something we're studying, but has to compete for capital. Certainly the fundamentals of the asset is incredibly strong. We understand the market. But one of the reasons we continue to talk about the competitive settings is because that flows directly into our ability to grow. So we recently sanctioned a sustaining mine, Western Ridge Crusher, just a few months ago. And as I said, continue to look at growth, but nothing decided past the 305.
And obviously there's been sort of the emergence of iron ore, high-grade iron ore in West Africa, and it's sort of been dubbed the Pilbara killer, which may be probably a bit overdone. But with that sort of thing in mind, that there's a lot of supply coming on in the next few years, how does WA iron ore as a whole remain competitive?
So the Simandou project coming on, and indeed some other sources of growth, again, I think ourselves and many of our peers, of course, would have recognised that. And that, coupled with the moderating demand, certainly does put a focus on the cost basis and the quality of the resource. Look, I think I'll go back to stating being the lowest cost producer positions us very well, and maintaining that position of resilience, I think is just kind of fundamental to our ability to maintain the strength. I think the Pilbara, Western Australia, has really shown itself over decades to be incredibly resilient, both from the private sector, but also the support of state government has seen that play out.
A couple of weeks ago, BHP took analysts to Chile to look at the copper assets. There were some pretty large capital cost numbers thrown around after that visit. How does the South Australian iron ore division compete for capital, with that in mind?
Yeah. So we do have a lot of growth options for sure, and there is a lot of competition for capital. Part of the strategy at BHP centres on being in the right commodities, having great assets, and a capital allocation framework that drives that. Look, we're investing in Copper South Australia now. In fact, we're investing in iron ore now. So there is competition for capital, but equally the attractiveness of those assets play through. So in Copper South Australia, of course, the acquisition of the Oz Minerals assets, the exploration success in Oak Dam, we're anticipating and planning for a world where we may be able to double the copper output over the course of the next 10 years. So we've got 13 rigs in exploration now, and actively looking at how we can advance the studies for that. As I said, Western Australia Iron Ore continue to invest in the sustaining the business as well. Autonomy, looking at the electrification. Actually, just this week, together with APA, very pleasantly announced solar and wind renewable energy to support the port operations. So there is strong competition for capital. I'm all about Team Australia, so getting the settings right, getting the labour force right, that's why that's so important.
One commodity where Australia has struggled to compete is nickel. Obviously, earlier this year, you made the pretty tough decision to close the Nickel West division. Is nickel in Australia dead?
So we did need to take that decision after much thought, and certainly for the very foreseeable future, the surplus that's in the market creates quite an overhang, and despite growing demand, that overhang we think will probably take us to the end of the decade. I wouldn't necessarily subscribe to the view that nickel is dead. I think if there's a supportive price environment, if there is an opportunity to reset the cost basis and the competitiveness through technology and a modernized supply chain or a value chain, I think that's certainly very, very plausible. But lots to see how that market plays out, both our ability to compete and how different market supply sources come on.
And how about the redeployment of some of those nickel workers? How has that progressed?
So we made a commitment as part of the moving into temporary suspension to work with our communities, with state government and with our employee base, and part of that was, Chris, to offer redeployment, because talent, as I've spoken about, very difficult to come by. So yeah, very pleased to kind of share, I think it's about 700 of our Nickel West colleagues heading to predominantly iron ore, but also to Copper South Australia, across to Queensland, the met coal assets. So yeah, that's been good for our employees, and it's been good for the company.
And speaking of coal, several of your peers have exited coal in recent years, yet BHP is still there for now. How do you see the future of the coal business?
So the metallurgical coal business, we see a continued strong demand, and particularly from India. 40% of our coal goes to India, and we make up a significant part of their imports. We've high-graded the portfolio to really concentrate our assets on the highest grade coal, because we think that's where ultimately there's more tightness in the market, and that the higher grade of coal contributes to a more energy efficient steel making. We think the blast furnace will actually prevail for many years to come yet, notwithstanding the efforts, including between ourselves and some of our biggest steel customers, to advance the green steel and lower carbon steel. But certainly as we transition to that future, it's our view that metallurgical coal, and particularly the high grade, will be a core part of that.
Obviously, 2025 is going to be an election year. Well, it's going to be a state election in Western Australia, and also a federal election. Obviously, the same job, same pay legislation was not a favourite of BHP's, but it's now gone through. What would be your, sort of the absolute top of the wish list in terms of, the upcoming elections for BHP?
I think, as I spoke about just there's many policy settings. The changes to the industrial relation laws that have taken place over the past couple of years, without a doubt, and this is not just BHP saying this is, and not even the mining sector, it's broader than that, it's all of business, that the changes that have come in add costs, they impede productivity, and ultimately kind of are a drag on productivity and competitiveness. So the absolute wish list is to see those repealed or changed. And I think that's something that would be welcomed across business.
What about anything specific in Western Australia?
In Western Australia, look, I think the same kind of underpinnings are as relevant there as they are more broadly. But we have a good relationship, as the sector does more broadly, with the Western Australian government. And you know, the key to good policy making is the opportunity to have a constructive dialogue and engage in a design of policy settings that work for the sector and indeed work for the state and the country. Of course, we all have our different realities, but it's that relationship and the coming together that should inform the best policy settings.
Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Obviously, you know, we're wrapping up another year, another good year for BHP in terms of, you know, financial results, operational results. What's your sort of biggest focus for 2025?
So much of what I've talked about here. So the core business, the imperative for continued focus on safety and our people, that's really never far from my priorities, and the engagement with our Indigenous traditional owner partners and with communities. I think beyond that, it is working with the sector and, you know, with policymakers to inform the settings that will allow Australia to compete for capital. So we've got some outstanding opportunities in Copper South Australia in particular, but also in iron ore. And if we can arrive at the policy settings, work on investing in technology, both the private sector, of course, and you know, great to see that that review announced this week. I think that's my biggest focus, because that's what will set us up for growth going forward.
And on technology, obviously you touched on AI and how that's becoming such an important sector in the world. How much is BHP sort of dabbling in that space? And I guess how could you see that sort of unfolding in terms of, you know, improving productivity and the like?
So we deploy, and I'm sure many are here in the room, technology and digital technologies, predictive analytics, autonomy, increasingly AI, but early stages, across the supply chain. I mean, it's an inherently repeatable and predictable process, and it's also incredibly data rich. 50-60% of our mines are now autonomous. The opportunity to go beyond, if you like, the 1.0 to the 2.0 of autonomy in terms of the smart mine. I think that's an area that offers opportunity. In safety, there's an enormous opportunity. We know that the interaction between vehicles and people, that's where most of our injuries and tragically fatalities occur. So providing that, whether it's separation or detection, is an area. And you know, one of the other areas that we have deployed technology is either in our exploration, both directly through the kind of bringing together of the geological data sets and data analytics to either move the pace or the insights, and also in our partnership with accelerators and startups, who often are just a little bit more agile than big companies in advancing technologies and trialing new things.
Well, we've got time for one more question. So I know you spoke about AFLW. Who's your team?
So there's 32 Irish players in AFLW. It's for anyone that follows it, you have a lot of Gaelic footballers that come across. So I've been following Geelong all year, and Aisling Maloney, who's a great goalie there. But yeah, I do switch between them depending where the players come from.
Very diplomatic. Thank you, Geraldine. Sally will come up now to facilitate Q&A.
Okay.
Thank you. We'll take some questions from the audience now. So if you are asking a question, please just share your name and your organisation. And I am going to try and find Sam, over to you.
Hi, Annabelle Sleeman from Morgans Financial. Thanks for your insights today, Geraldine. I just wanted to get your view on the downstream processing industry in Australia. Obviously, it's an area that Australia is wanting to become more competitive in and has struggled of recent times. So just wanted to get your view on what Australia can do to become more competitive and successful in that industry, and how much collaboration it will take with other countries and other global firms.
So look, great question, and it's certainly very topical. I think much of what I've talked about is actually directly relevant. Indeed, it's even more relevant because in the upstream resources sector, of course, we've got the partnerships and the experience with the broader mining services sector, and have established that prowess and that experience over many decades. I think to achieve the same outcomes and strength in the downstream sector, the policy settings matter in terms of attracting investment and the reliability of that. I think partnerships with whether it's downstream players, but particularly we've seen if we think about nickel, back to your example, and the partnerships that we saw Sino-Indonesia to unlock nickel processing and then establish that sector at scale. I mean, that's the kind of transformational partnerships and focusing on lowering the cost of supply. Now we would, of course, as I said, I think in my remarks, the standards, the ESG standards we have here in Australia are something that we're very proud of. But that concept of unlocking through technology and partnerships, I think has huge relevance.
Thank you. With you, Richard.
Hello, Nick Nicoludis from PwC. I'm just wondering as well, we talk about energy and energy resources, but the big discussion here in Australia has been how we can make it more effective. You mentioned coal, but obviously the move of nuclear now as well, and having to look at mining nuclear assets and resources and how they're becoming more effective and efficient. It would be great to get your insight into what you're looking in that space.
So, look, I think in terms of provision of energy and energy generation, there's like many, there's a broad thematic of our Scope 2 and our Scope 1 emissions, which is huge progress on Scope 1, which is predominantly on solar and wind, but increasingly the firming power component of that, as you call out, is important. And inside the mine gate, very different from diesel displacement. Look, I think in terms of nuclear per se, as is apparent, the transition to renewables isn't necessarily a straight line, and the stability of grid, the importance of firming power, be it from gas, be it from nuclear, is increasingly something that we actually have to solve for. And so our position, particularly on nuclear, is let's not take it off the table. We need to have a technology and technology agnostic approach to energy, and let the market decide. Let the market decide what is the appropriate generation technology to take forward. So great question, lots to play out.
Great. And I think Sam, with you. Thanks.
William Morgan, a regulatory question. McPhillamys Regis President. We've got green, red and Indigenous tape so burdensome that ministers are now granting themselves sole discretion on go or no go on projects. How do we wind that back?
So the standards are great. I think the reality of getting a project up is incredibly complex. I think the Samuels review called that out, actually with a lot of richness. I think you've got to bring the project proponents together with policymakers and essentially take a case study approach. And equally, where we've got major projects of national significance, we've seen other governments take a more curated approach, both in streamlining permitting for all projects, but also recognising where you've got projects of national significance, how do you curate those and provide some guardrails as it goes through the process.
Great. With Sam, I think. Thanks.
Hey Geraldine, Julian Wise here, BHP. I'm speaking with another energy-related question. So in particular, thinking about the high energy minerals such as nickel and aluminium and the other ones where there's a healthy amount of energy that needs to go in to get the actual material out of the ore. Is there much collaboration with different energy policy makers? Is there a strategy in place to ensure that these divisions in Australia and sectors are more competitive? And is there any actual dialogue going on there around a strategic energy strategy in relation to our minerals industry?
Look, a good question, and there may well be others in the room who are actually closer to this, particularly as you call out the aluminium and not in the nickel, of course, at the moment. I think the strategic dialogue question comes back to that earlier question on the energy grid more broadly in Australia, because a grid that's stable, an energy mix that has diversity to it, that's reliable and lower cost, takes advantage of some of the indigenous resources that we have, as well as the investment in renewables, is one that'll be inherently lower cost. So dialogue, yes. Look, I'm not close to that specifically myself, but in the same way as I would take a view on how do we unlock permitting to be both sustainable but also efficient and reliable. That same argument would apply in energy.
Great, and I think we have time for one last question.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. Hi, my name is Ronald Salim. Yeah, I'm from University of Melbourne. So you did mention about AI, and I would like to know more, how does BHP implement it in the resources sector? And for me as a young graduate, I would love to have you maybe one small piece of advice, maybe that 30 years back then, if you can meet your younger self, what would you tell that person? Thank you.
So in terms of meeting my younger self, I would say that the same to the students here, is that you've already probably taken the most important step in your career in choosing to be a part of the resources sector, because there's just very little that has such significance in terms of the difference it makes to everything from local communities to developing nations, but also the breadth of opportunities that it offers, both in terms of discipline, but also, opportunities to travel to all kinds of far-flung places. Look, I think in terms of our investment in artificial intelligence, but also innovation and technologies more broadly, I'd say a couple of things. One is the nature of what we do in the resources sector is inherently an environment where in many cases your processes do need to be predictable, stable, safe. So we want people to follow a particular routine and incrementally focus on improvement. Sometimes that's not the approach that truly unlocks innovation and step change outcomes. And so part of what we seek to do through programs like Explore, through our some of our venture capital divisions, is to take the business problem we're trying to solve, so resource discovery, understanding, automation, and partner with external partners, whether they're startups or technology companies, and try and bring the business problem together with the data or the technology solution, so that you're really working on the biggest things. But it doesn't always happen internally. A lot of it does, but many times that partnership externally gives you the space and the opportunity to bring more challenge.
Wonderful, thank you. Geraldine and Christy, I'll ask you to stay there, and I'd like to invite John Tivy, partner from White & Case, on the stage to give the vote of thanks.
Thanks, Sally. Members and guests, it's my great pleasure to thank our speaker today. Before I do that, I'd like to first say thank you to Christy for leading the discussion today. I know there's a lot of work that goes into preparing for these, and your questions really, I think, drew out some of the themes and highlighted some of the challenges that BHP faces day to day in facing the challenges in key competition challenges in key areas. And thank you, Geraldine. You set the scene with your discussion of topics around the theme of competitiveness, and as you said, there's a need for relentless pursuit of a better future and the need for us all to hold every policy up to the light and assess its alignment with our goals. You highlighted 3 areas of focus: workforce, technology, and a culture of competitiveness, including in the areas of permitting and risks. Geraldine emphasised the need for collective enterprise of the industry to act in each of these areas in the face of energy transition and the industrial revolution that's following that transition. Members and guests, please join me in thanking Geraldine Slattery for her presentation today.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Oh God, I'll take this out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we have a small gift for Christy too, to thank her for her wonderful work. Thank you so much.